She wired $55,000 to a wedding planner she found on Instagram. A month later, the planner vanished, and so did the wedding. Hi, I'm Margaret. I spent decades building dream weddings for other families while saving every penny to one day help my son have his. But when his fiancée told me to stay in my lane, I did, just not the way they expected. What I did next wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. But it changed everything. Have you ever been pushed aside by the very people you sacrificed for? Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? It was a Sunday afternoon when my son, Andrew, told me he was getting married. The light outside had just begun to turn warm and slanted, the kind of late spring glow that made my kitchen look like something out of a catalog. The kettle was hissing on the stove, my favorite mug sat waiting, and I was preparing tea the same way I had for decades. 3 minutes steep, 1 teaspoon of honey, never sugar. Some rituals hold the years together like string. Andrew was tapping his foot beneath the kitchen table, scrolling through something on his phone, pausing every few seconds as if he were rehearsing. I thought he was distracted, maybe tired. I didn't know he was working up the courage to drop a bombshell. Then he said it. Mom, I proposed. Taylor said yes. Time didn't stop, but it slowed in a way I'd only experienced during big moments. Births, goodbyes, and now this. I looked up from my tea bag, and there he was, nervous, hopeful, proud. The little boy with grass-stained jeans and wild dreams was now a man, someone's future husband, my son. My heart swelled, then cracked a little. It's strange how joy can bruise. That's wonderful, I said, my smile so wide it hurt. Oh, honey, I'm so happy for you both. And I meant it. For a moment, I allowed myself to drift into that old world I once knew. I pictured white linens, soft music, handwritten place cards, and bouquets that smelled like late May. I imagined the kind of day I used to build for other families for 35 years. Before I retired, they called me the wedding whisperer of Boston. I knew how to pull joy from tension, beauty from chaos. I'd planned galas and garden vows, barn receptions and ballroom banquets. But this would be ours. I already have a few ideas, I said, laughing softly. Not to overstep, of course. Just to help if you need. Andrew's smile thinned. Actually, he said slowly, Taylor kind of already has a vision. I blinked. She's really into modern minimalist stuff. She follows this planner on social media, does incredible work. She was thinking of reaching out. My hands, still wrapped around the warm mug, went cold. Oh, I said. I just figured, it's a family event. I thought maybe I could be part of some of the decisions. Just a little. He hesitated. That should have been my warning. Then came the sentence that would haunt every moment after. He cleared his throat. And please don't take this the wrong way, but Taylor thinks it'd be best if you just stayed in your lane. For a full 5 seconds, I didn't speak. I smiled, though it felt like a reflex more than a choice. A big, fake, motherly smile meant to disguise shock. I waited for him to laugh, to say it was a poor joke, that she didn't really mean it. He didn't. She just wants to avoid confusion, he added, looking down. You know how she is. Yes, I thought. I did. I nodded, the mug still in my hand, its warmth useless now. Of course, I said, but I didn't finish the tea. I set it down, excused myself with a vague excuse about an old friend calling, and left the kitchen. My bedroom was darker than the rest of the house, the blinds still drawn from the early morning. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. I didn't cry. That would come later. Right then, I was just trying to understand how I'd gone from being the woman who orchestrated joy to someone who needed to be managed. How, after a lifetime of caring, I had become dispensable. I told myself it was wedding stress, that Taylor didn't mean it that way, that Andrew was just trying to keep the peace. But I couldn't stop hearing those words. Stay in your lane. Like I was some rogue vehicle barreling toward chaos. like my inclusion was a threat, like the years I had poured into Andrew, every scraped knee kissed, every late-night pickup, every piece of myself I gave could be boxed and set aside. I lay down and stared at the ceiling. A spider moved slowly in the corner, spinning a thread between two beams of afternoon light, steady, unnoticed, building something delicate. I used to be like that spider. In the quiet, I thought of all the weddings I had helped create. I thought of the mothers who stood beside me, crying softly when their children walked down the aisle. And I remembered how often I envied them, wondering if I'd ever get that day. Not for the flowers or the flair, but for the feeling of being essential. And now I was being told to step aside before I'd even been invited in. I didn't move for a long time. I just lay there, the sentence echoing inside my head like a low hum. Stay in your lane. Not, we'd love your help. Not, let's plan this together. Just a border drawn around me. A boundary I hadn't agreed to. A dismissal disguised as direction. Eventually, the light dimmed. Birds chirped less often. Evening came, but I stayed still. And I told myself, like mothers do, that it wasn't personal, that I'd understand with time, that I was fine. But something inside me knew better. I wasn't fine. Something had cracked. Something subtle but irreversible. The kind of thing that doesn't scream. It whispers. And its voice was clear. You're not needed here. I turned to the window and watched the clouds drift across the pinking sky. Somewhere out there, Taylor was planning her perfect wedding, and I was already being edited out. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to remember who I was, what I had done, what I was worth. And beneath all the thoughts and bruises and confusion, a question formed, soft but sharp. When did love come with terms and lanes? I didn't bring a speech. I brought a folder. Turns out both were too much. It had taken me 2 days to put it together. Cream-colored cardstock dividers, hand-labeled tabs, tiny Post-its marking color palettes, and venue lighting suggestions. Nothing flashy, just the quiet kind of work that builds weddings, the kind of work I had built my name on. My Wedding Whisperer folder, a humble relic from my past, revived for one more shot at belonging. Taylor had texted me the week before. Lunch at Haven Cafe with my mom plus some friends. Vibe check, chat for the wedding. Vibe check. Not planning, not would love your ideas. Just vibes. But I clung to that invitation like a vine on the side of a crumbling house. Any grip would do. So I pressed my blouse, a soft peach one with gold buttons, and wore the earrings Andrew had given me on his first work promotion. I even curled my hair, just slightly, the way I used to for client meetings. I wanted to look like someone you took seriously, someone useful. Haven Cafe was bright, airy, and full of plants that looked too delicate to survive a week without misting. Jazz played softly in the background, the kind meant to make people feel classy while spending $7 on a latte. I arrived 5 minutes early. Of course I did. Taylor's friends were already seated, 3 of them, all sleek hair, long nails, phones face up on the table. Her mother, Diane, sat among them like a pageant coach holding court. Taylor barely looked up. "Hey," she said, then turned back to her screen. I smiled, took the seat at the far end, and ordered a chamomile tea I didn't want. I placed my folder gently on the table, waiting for the right moment. They chatted about bachelorette destinations, Palm Springs, maybe Napa. Diane suggested something less dusty. One of the girls mentioned a rooftop bar with mirrored walls and a neon arch. So cute, they all agreed. I sat quietly, nodding when appropriate, swallowing the lump that was already forming. When the conversation finally turned to the wedding style, I leaned forward a little, smiled, and opened my folder. "I brought a few things," I said gently, "just some visuals and ideas. Not to step on anything, of course, but I thought you might like to see." The air changed. Not sharply, just a subtle drop in warmth. Taylor didn't even glance at the papers. "Oh, that's okay, Margaret," she said with a light wave. "We're going for something a little more current." She said it kindly. That's what made it worse. Her smile was soft, her tone apologetic, but it was the same thing I'd heard before, just wrapped in lavender. "We just want it to feel really fresh, you know," she added. "More us." Diane leaned toward her, whispering, though not quietly enough, "I told you she'd bring something." The words landed like pebbles in my tea. I folded the edge of the folder under my palm. "Of course," I said. "I completely understand." Another friend chimed in. "We're actually thinking of hiring this planner from LA. She's amazing. Savannah Bloom. Have you seen her TikToks? Insane stuff. Disco balls, neon, all of it." The others nodded in unison. Taylor's eyes lit up. "Yeah, she did this wedding with LED vines that responded to music. It was like a forest rave." They laughed. I smiled. My folder remained open, untouched. One of the girls asked what my role had been before I retired. "I planned weddings," I said, "for 35 years. There was a pause. "Cool," one of them said. And then, nothing. Taylor sipped her iced coffee and turned to her phone again. Diane leaned across the table, all fake warmth. "Well, you must have so many stories," she said, "but weddings have changed so much, haven't they?" "Yes," I replied, "but people don't. Not really." She blinked, confused. I didn't clarify. A few minutes later, I closed the folder slowly. I didn't rush it. Just one tab at a time, one page at a time, like putting something precious back in a box where it would stay. Taylor looked at me and said, with that polished glaze of civility, "We really appreciate your passion, Margaret. Seriously. But I already have a vision. This just isn't that kind of wedding." Of course it wasn't. We wrapped up lunch with a round of lukewarm hugs. Taylor barely touched my arm. Diane's kiss on the cheek landed a half-inch in the air. One of the girls waved with her phone. As I walked to my car, I passed a flower cart. Tulips, pale pink, the kind I once used in a spring wedding that made the bride's mother cry. I didn't stop. Inside my car, I turned on the radio. Soft jazz. I kept my hands on the steering wheel, both resting gently, as if I were about to drive but couldn't remember where. I didn't cry. I don't do that in parking lots. But I felt it. That hollowness. That quiet space where recognition used to live. I sat for a while, letting the music fill the silence. The folder sat on the passenger seat, untouched, like a child's drawing left behind at a gallery. I thought of all the hours I had spent helping other women feel seen on their daughters' and sons' big days. And now, I couldn't even get a glance. I wasn't angry, not yet. That would come later. For now, I was just erased. How could I feel like an intruder in the life I helped build? They thought the money was silent, but it spoke louder than anything I could have said. The morning I went to the bank, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at a worn, leather-bound book. It was my late husband's savings log, the kind we used to joke about. Him, the meticulous one, me, the dreamer. Tucked between the pages was a note in his handwriting, faded and blue, just above a row of careful calculations. For Andrew's day, make it count. We'd started saving the year Andrew turned 10. A few hundred here, 1,000 there. Canceled vacations, modest Christmases, secondhand coats. It wasn't about the spectacle. It was about giving him the kind of day we never had, the kind where love showed up in every detail. I had held onto that account like a sacred promise. Until now. Because love, as I've come to learn, shouldn't come at the cost of erasure. I didn't tell anyone I was going, not Helen, not even my reflection in the hallway mirror. I just dressed in my navy cardigan, the one with the soft elbows and wooden buttons, and walked out the door with the checkbook tucked in my purse beside a peppermint and a folded grocery list I wouldn't need today. The bank smelled like artificial citrus and old carpet. Fluorescent lights hummed above me. I stood in line between a man arguing on Bluetooth and a teenager depositing birthday cash. Life continued around me as if mine hadn't just tilted. When it was my turn, a young woman with a name tag that read Jordan waved me forward. Her nails were lavender, glossy, tapping lightly against the keys as I spoke. "I'd like to transfer funds from a joint savings to a private account," I said, "and withdraw part of it." She smiled like I'd asked for a latte. "Of course. Let's pull that up for you." To her, it was another transaction. To me, it was a funeral without flowers. She asked no questions as I filled out the slip. The number sat there. $55,000. The kind of number that could build a wedding or erase a mother. I left $500 behind like a ghost of what could have been. Just enough to say I hadn't vanished. Just enough to keep appearances. Once it was done, Jordan handed me the receipt. "All set. Anything else today?" "No," I said. "That'll be all." I stepped outside into the wind. Cold, brisk, honest. It tugged at my cardigan and pulled my breath a little tighter. But I felt no regret, only release. Like taking off a dress that never quite fit. Later that afternoon, I sat at my desk and pulled out a cream envelope. Inside, I placed a check for $500 and a handwritten note. "Dear Andrew and Taylor, as you prepare for your big day, I wanted to offer a small contribution. I trust you'll make it beautiful and meaningful in your own way. Wishing you both joy always. With love, Mom." No sarcasm, no bitterness, just boundaries. I sealed it, pressed the flap down firmly, and walked it to the mailbox at the end of my street. The flag went up with a click. That red flag, a tiny act of rebellion. Helen came over that evening with a casserole and 2 bottles of sparkling water. She always knew when to show up without asking. I didn't tell her everything, just enough. She listened, nodding slowly. Then she looked at me and said, "Silence doesn't mean surrender, you know." I nodded. I know. But silence, I was learning, can be the strongest reply. We sat in the living room with mismatched socks and warm plates on our laps. We didn't talk about Andrew or Taylor or the folder. We watched a rerun of a baking show and laughed when the meringue collapsed. It felt good to laugh again. Small, real laughter. Not the polite kind I wore at the cafe. After Helen left, I lit a candle and sat by the window. The house was quiet, peaceful even. I thought about all the weddings I had planned, about mothers who cried happy tears, who were thanked, embraced, needed. And then I thought of Taylor's words. "We're doing something more current. I just want everyone to stay in their lane." Well, I had stayed, and I had taken the road with me. This wasn't revenge. Not really. It was clarity. It was finally understanding that support is not submission, and silence doesn't equal consent. I wasn't trying to sabotage anything. I was simply stepping out of the spotlight I'd never been invited into, quietly, cleanly, with dignity. As I turned out the lights and climbed into bed, I thought again of my husband's handwriting. Make it count. I had. I had counted every dollar, every moment, every decision, and I had finally made one that belonged only to me, the kind that doesn't ask permission. And for the first time in months, I slept deeply. No racing thoughts, no imaginary speeches, just rest. Still, as I drifted off, a question stirred in the back of my mind. Soft, almost shy. Was I finally becoming free, or just finally done? They planned a wedding without me, but they didn't plan for disaster. It was early evening when the doorbell rang. 3 quick chimes, anxious and unplanned. I just set the kettle on and was folding laundry on the couch, the kind of quiet task that keeps your hands busy when your heart needs rest. When I opened the door, Andrew stood there, looking nothing like the proud fiancé he'd been just weeks before. His shoulders slumped, hair uncombed, eyes rimmed red. He looked like someone who'd sprinted through a storm, only to find the house he was running toward already locked. "Can I come in?" he asked, voice low. I stepped aside without a word. The kettle whistled softly from the kitchen. I didn't rush to turn it off. It was the only sound in the room for a moment. That, and the old clock ticking on the mantel, steady and unbothered. Andrew sat down on the edge of the couch like he wasn't sure if he belonged there. He didn't take off his jacket. "She's gone," he said. I sat across from him, hands folded. "Who?" "Savannah Bloom, the planner." His voice cracked on her name like it hurt to say it. I waited. "She disappeared. Website's down. Numbers disconnected. Taylor can't reach her. The deposit's gone. All of it. 55,000. The kettle squealed louder now. I stood, walked to the kitchen, turned it off with a click, and poured water into 2 mugs. Chamomile for me. Nothing for him. He hadn't asked. When I came back, he hadn't moved. "I told her not to wire it all up front," he muttered. But she was so sure. Said we had to book fast, that Savannah was exclusive. She didn't want to lose the date. I sat. He rubbed the back of his neck. "She blames me. Said I should have convinced you. Said none of this would have happened if we'd just used your money." I sipped my tea. He looked up. "Why didn't you just tell us? About the account? About the change?" I met his eyes. "Because you weren't listening." That silenced him more than I expected. He dropped his gaze, stared at the floor like it might offer a better answer. "Mom," he began, "we didn't mean to exclude you. Taylor just wanted control. You know how she gets when she's overwhelmed." "Being overwhelmed," I said gently, "is not an excuse for disrespect." He nodded but didn't look at me. "There was a time not long ago when I would have softened here, when I would have said, 'It's okay,' and taken the blame for things I didn't break. But something had shifted. Not just in how I saw them, but in how I saw myself." "You asked me to stay in my lane," I said, voice calm. "So I did, and I took everything with me." He winced. "It's not like that." "But it is." The ticking clock filled the room again. The mug warmed my palms, but there was no comfort in the heat. "I wanted to help, Andrew," I continued. "I wanted to be part of something. Not for the flowers or the cake, for the chance to stand beside you, to be there. But you let her draw the lines, and then you asked me to live inside them. I didn't think it would go this far." "No," I said. "You didn't think at all. You let convenience become your compass." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands. "I messed this up." I said nothing. Some lessons don't need commentary, just silence. "She's not talking to me right now," he said after a while. "Taylor, she's furious, says I should have fixed it." "And what would fixing it look like?" "I don't know," he said. "Maybe if you still had the money?" I raised an eyebrow. "So that's what this is? You're here for the check?" "No." He shook his head quickly. "No, that's not. I don't know why I came." But he did, and so did I. There's a look your child gives you only when the scaffolding around them has collapsed, when they are no longer proud, no longer pretending, just raw, hurting, human. That's the face he wore now, and I saw something else in it too. He wasn't just looking for help, he was looking for absolution. But forgiveness doesn't always come on cue, especially not when the stage was built without you and the curtain fell before you ever got to step on it. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for everything." I nodded slowly. "Thank you." But I didn't offer more than that. Some moments aren't about healing others, they're about holding your own line. He stood after a while, hands stuffed into jacket pockets. "Where are you going?" I asked. He shrugged. "Back to the apartment, I guess. I don't know." I walked him to the door. The night air had cooled. Wind tugged gently at the trees outside. He paused at the threshold, then turned back. "Mom, do you hate her?" I thought about that. "No," I said. "I don't hate her." He nodded once, as if he wasn't sure whether to be relieved or disappointed. "She's not evil, Andrew," I added. "She's just very young in ways that matter." He left without another word. I watched him go, his figure shrinking into the night like a man who finally understood the weight of what he'd lost. Not the money, not the planner. Something quieter, something harder to rebuild. And for once, I didn't feel the need to follow. I closed the door gently and turned back to the quiet. My tea had cooled. The lamp glowed warmly against the walls. And I wondered, not bitterly, just honestly, was this punishment? Or was it clarity finally catching up? The first time I met her, she didn't try to impress me. She asked about me. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early October when Andrew called. His voice was steadier than it had been the last few times, but it still carried the weight of someone who'd learned too much, too fast. "Mom," he said, "I want to introduce you to someone." We met at a coffee shop tucked between a bookstore and a florist. One of those little places where the tables wobble and the napkins come in mismatched jars. I arrived early as usual and chose a window seat. Outside, leaves skated along the sidewalk, rustling like whispered secrets. Inside, acoustic music hummed beneath the low chatter of students and regulars. I was stirring cream into my coffee when I saw them walk in. Andrew spotted me first, gave a small, sheepish wave, and then she followed. Emily. She had kind eyes, not the polished kind, no hard edges, no performance. She looked at me the way people do when they're really seeing you, not scanning for value. "Hi, Margaret," she said, holding out her hand. "I've heard a lot about you. All good, I promise." I smiled. "That's a relief." We sat. She ordered chamomile, no sugar, and folded her scarf neatly over her lap like she'd been raised with quiet manners, not showy ones. Andrew let her lead the conversation, which surprised me more than I admitted. She didn't ask about drama. She didn't mention Taylor. Instead, she asked, "What did you love most about your work?" It caught me off guard. Most people asked about celebrity clients or horror stories. But this was different. I thought for a moment. "Helping people feel held," I said finally. "Helping them walk into a space that felt like their best self was waiting for them there." Emily nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. She told me about her childhood. Small-town Iowa, summer weddings in church basements, potluck receptions with lemonade and plastic cups. "My parents never had much," she said, "but they danced like they did. I want that. Not the stuff, the feeling." She paused, then added, "If we do this, Andrew and I want you in it. From the start." I didn't answer right away. I looked at Andrew. He was watching me, his hands wrapped around his cup, quiet but present in a way he hadn't been for years. "This isn't about fixing what came before," Emily said. "I just think you're someone worth building with." That night, I opened a new notebook. I didn't write vendors or schedules. I wrote feelings, peace, joy, presence, grace, and in the margins, not needed, chosen. A week later, we visited the garden venue together. It wasn't grand, no fountains, no sweeping staircases, just a patch of earth where sun filtered through old oaks and a wooden trellis leaned slightly to one side like it was bowing to time. Emily walked slowly through the grass, her boots leaving faint prints. She pointed out where she imagined chairs, a table for memories, a space for silence. "Not everything needs music," she said softly. "Sometimes people just want to feel." I had spent decades filling spaces, with flowers, with sounds, with spectacle. But this felt like sculpting quiet. A wedding not for Instagram, but for soul. Andrew helped carry a box of linen samples from the car. He didn't say much, but when I handed him a swatch of pale sage, he held it in both hands like it mattered. Later, we sat on a bench near the edge of the garden. Emily leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "You don't just plan weddings," she said, looking at me. "You make people feel seen." No one had ever said that to me. Not like that, not without motive. I blinked away the heat in my eyes. "You're kind," I said. "I'm honest," she replied. On the drive home, I didn't turn on the radio. I wanted to hear the silence. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't loud. It just was, like breath. That evening, I lit a candle on the windowsill, the same one I hadn't touched since my husband's birthday last year. The house smelled like lavender and wood smoke, the good kind of memory. I pulled out the notebook again and added to my list, still capable, still seen, still needed, but only by choice. Emily didn't need me to prove anything. She had no vision to defend. She wasn't curating a brand. She was building a day. And somehow, I was part of it. Not as a placeholder or fallback, but as someone who still had something sacred to offer. This time, I wasn't filling space. I was shaping it. Could this be what I waited for all along? Not forgiveness, but recognition? There were no chandeliers, no hashtags, just love. And that was enough. The sun slanted low across the garden as guests began to arrive. It was golden hour, the kind of light photographers pray for and poets try to describe. Everything glowed, leaves, skin, the edges of the linen-draped chairs. The air smelled of jasmine and earth. Somewhere nearby, children squealed as they chased bubbles on the lawn, and soft jazz played from an old speaker nestled behind potted ferns. I stood near the back, clipboard in hand, not to direct, just to steady myself. Everything had already fallen into place. String lights flickered gently above the arbor, where Andrew stood in a slate-blue suit, eyes locked on the garden path. And then Emily appeared. She didn't float. She didn't glide. She walked, real, steady, present. A simple bouquet of wildflowers rested in her hands. Her dress was cream, not white. Her shoes were flat, but none of that mattered, because what shone wasn't what she wore. It was the way she looked at him. Their vows were quiet. There were no microphones, no dramatic pauses, just promises, spoken in the voices of people who had learned the cost of things and still chosen joy. "I promised to ask questions," Emily said. "I promised to listen," Andrew replied. Some guests wiped away tears. I didn't. Mine stayed just behind the rim, warm, full, but content. When the ceremony ended, laughter rippled through the garden like wind. Tables were set beneath the trees, draped in soft linens. Bowls of roasted vegetables, fresh bread, grilled chicken, and pitchers of lemonade made their way across tables like offerings. No formal seating, no seating chart drama, just people sharing. I moved among them like a gentle current, refilling glasses, adjusting a crooked sign, tucking in a napkin, flapping in the breeze, not as a planner, as someone who cared. Emily found me near the dessert table where slices of apple tart were being devoured faster than we could plate them. She wrapped her arms around me before I could say a word. "This is everything I hoped for," she whispered. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Later, Andrew approached me with something in his hand, a photo. It was Emily, barefoot in the garden, holding a bundle of wildflowers. Her face half turned to the sun, caught mid-laugh. "She said you were the heart of this," he said, "that none of it would have happened the way it did without you." I traced the edge of the photo with my thumb. "I didn't do much," I said. "You showed up," he replied. "That was everything." As the evening wore on, I stepped away for a moment, found a quiet corner near the edge of the garden where fairy lights twinkled gently in the trees. The music faded into the background. I closed my eyes, and I smiled. They told me to stay in my lane. But this lane, it led me back to myself. No grand announcements, no retribution, just peace. Because healing, I had learned, doesn't always arrive with trumpets. Sometimes it comes as a hand on your back, a place at the table, a moment of stillness beneath the trees. I stood there for a long time, just watching. Emily danced with Andrew under the lights, arms loose, laughter easy. Diane from the florist twirled with her husband. A toddler with jam on his face tried to feed grapes to a dog too dignified for nonsense. And me, I was part of it, not centered, not spotlighted, but present. For once, I didn't need applause, just presence. Maybe the loudest revenge is living a life so full they can't ignore it. As music and laughter echoed through the garden that night, I stood quietly by the edge and felt something I hadn't in years. Wholeness. Not because I was needed, but because I was finally seen. I've learned that love doesn't always come with ribbons. Sometimes it shows up in quiet recognition, and I carry this truth with me now. No one has the right to make you invisible. If you've ever been made to feel small in your own family, I invite you, share your story. Let's remind each other, we still matter, and we always have.